Welcome back to the interview with Russell Earl Magowan. This is part 4, and you were leaving Idaho to go back to California.
Yeah, well, to continue, we're now in California, and we went and we rented a small place for $25 a month, and it was very small. In fact, it was one room and a little kitchen and a bath, very small bath. But we didn't have any money. The problem was no money. And no relatives, because as I say, I was an orphan and I didn't have any relatives, so other than my brothers, and they weren't around. They were when I was in Las Vegas, the one that went to radio school with me. He was building a radio station up in Las Vegas. But anyway, so I went out and got produce from the fields at night, and we'd get squash and tomatoes and carrots and bring them home. We managed to eat those. Then I got a job picking tomatoes, and this was 35 cents a basket. But the only problem with picking tomatoes with this company was you had to carry the basket of tomatoes out to the end of the row as soon as it got full. Well, the rows were long, and it took quite a while to carry the basket to the end, so as a consequence I made very little money, but enough that we did get by. I had applied to the 6th Regional Civil Aeronautics Administration office for reinstatement and on the airway job, and they had told me that there would be a job open in Newhall, California in about a month. So that's where we were. I would call them each day to see if it was available, and it wasn't. And finally it became available, and I went to work at the Newhall Airways Communications Station. Well, one must realize the war was on at this time, and that station was extremely busy because there was no LAX at that time. There was no commercial planes that landed at Los Angeles at all. They all landed at Burbank. Burbank was the hub for the whole United States for Los Angeles airway traffic at that time due to the war. And the planes were mostly single-engine DC-3s. That was the main carrier for Western, Continental, American, and United. They were the major carriers. And they'd fly over, and we had one receiver in the station set up with 3117.5 kilocycles, and that was their frequency, and they would call us on that frequency and filed our flight plans on it, and so on. The Army had 4495 kilocycles, as I remember, and that was another receiver, and it had a big speaker up in the bank, and there were banks of speakers in a big panel, and there was calls coming in from aircraft constantly, and we used to do about 450 a day. In 24-hour day, we'd have 450 overflights at that station. Well, there was only one man on duty at a time for 8 hours, and I had to do everything for 8 hours, and we had 3 teletype machines, so you had to be pretty versatile on the teletype machine. One of them was for the weather, as I mentioned prior to this, and this showed all the sequential weather station after station. Palmdale, then Newhall, then Burbank, and then Los Angeles. The Army would put theirs on, and so on. Anyway, the other teletypes would be for all the flight plans for all the different planes. If a plane was leaving, as I say, from down in Texas, or Davis Mountain, for instance, he would put his flight plan on our Army number, his number, and then whether he was flying visual, which would be CFR, contact flight rules, or IFR, which would be instrument flight rules, depending upon the weather. And so you had, as I say, to be cognizant of all that and have all that stuff laid down in front of you. Well, when those Army planes came over, or in fact any plane, they'd ask you frequently what the altitude of the mountains were ahead, up over the ridge route, 5,800 feet. What's the Newhall Pass elevation occasionally if they were going to land at Newhall, 1,200 feet. And we knew all those things, and we'd give all that information out. Our runway, by the way, was not cement by any means. It was gravel, packed gravel on dirt, and it was 3,000 feet long, which at that time was sufficient to land most planes. The big 4-engine bombers, no. But although one or two did land there, and but that one of them turned up on its nose before it got to the end of the runway. But we did have accidents on the field occasionally. Private planes, one burned, and it was a Beechcraft Bonanzas, I remember, and we had to be help the planes land and give them all the information they wanted, the altimeter settings and the wind direction, which we had, and then we had to take weather observations, as I say, too. And at night, we had curtains, black curtains over the windows of the station, so none of the lights showed, because it was during the war. And if you'd go outside, you'd see searchlights up in the air, all the way up, out and down along the coast, I guess, where they were looking for aircraft, the Army. Anyway, I worked at that station, and then they transferred me to Mount Laguna. Mount Laguna needed an operator, and these ladies that they'd been training didn't turn out very well. They weren't having much luck with them. And before I went to Mount Laguna, I got called by the draft board. I must mention that. And I went down to Los Angeles, and they gave me a physical and a written exam, and told me, you go in that door there, and he points to the door. I went in. I said, that says Army. I want to go in the Navy. He said, you're going in there. Go in there. So I went in there. I was going to go into the Army. So I went home and I sold all my rabbits. I had 2 children now. I had Sharon and Julia. No, not Julia. Let me think. I have to think. Russell. Yes, Russell and Sharon. And so with 2 children, normally they kind of set you aside a little bit, but not too much. Eventually you had to go. And so I came back and I told the chief that I was being inducted into the Army, and he put on the teletype to Washington that I was being put into the Army. And they came back almost immediately and said he will be deferred. Keep him in the station. So that's where I stayed. And the operators were mostly all military men that were on the airways now. They'd been radiomen and communication operators. And the ladies, they had not panned out very well at all. The school, they weren't having much luck with them. They usually had to have a trained operator with them, and that didn't help too much. So for that reason, I was kept on. Well, now I did say that I was transferred to Mount Laguna, and that was flights, primarily they were flights of Marine aircraft from El Centro to San Diego overflights. And but this station was way high up in the mountain, and it was a dirt road going up with sagebrush each side, and it was really up there by itself. So I hiked up there. I didn't take my car the first time because I didn't know how good the road was. And on the way up, I saw mountain lion tracks. I could see them in the dirt. And when I got up there, there was a young lady. One of the ladies had been assigned to that station, but she couldn't handle it, so they were having me, experienced man, go up. And I asked her, where did you sleep, miss? She said, I slept in the motor generator shed, because they didn't have any power up there either. They had motor generator. And big high antennas on telephone poles, 90-foot poles with huge antennas on them. And all the teletype, they did have teletype, they had radio teletype, and it came in by radio to those antennas. And by the way, while I was up there at that station, I kind of got bored one evening. So I took my .22 revolver, which I always carried with me because I knew there were mountain lions, and I shot at one of the poles to see if I could hit it. And I did hit it. And as a consequence, the teletype machines, they started bang, 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 and they didn't print a thing. They just, all of them, all 3 circuits were going wild. And then there was a compressor behind the bank of receiver speakers, and it started running steady all the time. It was pumping gas up into the copper lines that to the antennas, and where the hole, I'd put in the hole in one of the copper lines going to the pole. So I climbed up the pole real quick. First I got a Paul Pete hammer. No, I didn't either. Pardon me. First I climbed up the pole, and it had steps on it. And I went up there, and I got up about 40 feet, and I could hear the gas hissing out the little copper pipe, which was the transmission line for the antenna. So I went down, and I got a Paul Pete hammer out of the toolbox, and I went up with it, and I tapped the copper tube where the hole was. Tap, 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 and I got it closed, and I heard all the teletypes down below close. They stopped running, and the compressor stopped running, and I knew I had it. So I came down.